I'm Brian Kleist, and I will be presenting on IT and mandated surveillance. To get started, we'll go through the presentation outline. To begin, what is mandated surveillance? Followed by a history, progression, we'll discuss recent occurrences, then go over the benefits and consequences, and then finish up with the discussion, questions, and references. So mandated surveillance can best be described as the government legislation or authorization to observe a person or group, especially those under suspicion or scrutiny. This is usually performed by government agencies, including the National Security Agency, the FBI, the CIA, as well as state and local agencies that are responsible for surveillance. Depending on the type of surveillance, they may partner with utility companies like Verizon or AT&T to conduct surveillance. Interesting fact, U.S. mass surveillance actually dates back to World War I. Going through the history, if we go back to 1791, when the Bill of Rights was passed, the Fourth Amendment granted citizens the right to be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures, and that no warrants were to be issued unless there was probable cause. However, in 1928, in the case of Olmstead versus the United States, the Supreme Court ruled that wiretapping phones did not violate the Fourth Amendment because federal agents did not actually trespass onto the physical property, and that phone conversations were not considered tangible assets. In 1967, in the case of Katz versus the United States, the Supreme Court ended up overturning the precedent by ruling that the Fourth Amendment does in fact protect non-tangible assets, such as phone calls and electronic transmissions, as well as provides a reasonable expectation of privacy in places like the home or the office. Following the September 11th attacks in 2001, Congress passed the Patriot Act. This act provided increased access to data collection, easing wiretapping restrictions, and permitting the collection of any intangible data, such as electronic data or phone calls, as part of a foreign intelligence or international terrorism investigation. In 2003, the Homeland Security Act was passed, which created the Department of Homeland Security as a cabinet-level department to further these anti-terrorism efforts. And in 2008, the PRISM program was enacted as a change to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, which allowed for the collection of data directly from the servers of at least 9 major tech companies. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the slides to come. If we go through a progression of the forms of surveillance, early on, it simply started with physical surveillance, which involved physically following the group being observed, and also included intercepting written correspondence such as mail or letters. With the invention of the telephone came the ability to wiretap calls and make audio recordings. And as technology advanced, this eventually led to video surveillance, GPS tracking, as well as internet and cell phone surveillance. More recently, government agencies have begun the collection of metadata, which includes data on several billion calls made in the U.S. each day. This data contains information such as call length, location, timing, date, and sometimes the content of the call. The latest debate has been centered on encryption. Encryption is actually designed to keep data secure. An example of encryption is password protection on your phone or computer. However, some surveillance methods can actually incorporate keystroke loggers that capture all the keystrokes that are put into a device. They can also utilize what's considered backdoor software, which would allow a third party to bypass the normal security authentication to gain access to information that is encrypted. There have been numerous reports in the media of government-mandated surveillance. These are only a handful. But in 2010, Twitter was actually issued a subpoena to furnish account information on over 600,000 Twitter users, primarily those who were followers of the website WikiLeaks, as the United States planned to prosecute Julian Assange. 3 years later, in 2013, Edward Snowden, a former National Security Agency subcontractor who was working for Booz Allen, leaked top-secret information about NSA surveillance activities, including how the NSA was collecting the telephone records of tens of millions of Americans and directing companies like Verizon to hand over all telephone data to the NSA on an ongoing daily basis. Additionally, Snowden revealed that the NSA tapped directly into the servers of those 9 internet firms, including Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo, to track online communication in a surveillance program known as PRISM. In 2016, a federal court ordered Apple to help the FBI unlock an iPhone that was used by one of the attackers who killed 14 people in San Bernardino, California. The court ordered Apple to create a backdoor software to bypass or disable the feature that automatically wipes an iPhone clean of all data after 10 incorrect password attempts have been entered. This would allow the government to try an unlimited number of password attempts. Apple devices only run on iOS software created by Apple, which is encrypted. That's why the FBI needed Apple to create the backdoor software so that it would mesh with the existing software. Apple refused to comply with the request because it would give someone the ability to unlock any iPhone in someone's physical possession, and it would set a precedent for compliance of future requests. The FBI did eventually gain access to the phone with the help of professional hackers who had discovered at least one previously unknown software flaw that was then used to create a piece of hardware that helped the FBI to crack the iPhone's 4-digit password. Most recently, in May of this year, 31 tech companies, including Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, wrote a letter asking Congress to make reforms to Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act, which included the PRISM program. This is how the NSA gathers the web data on citizens. The tech companies called for greater transparency, judicial oversight, and regulatory changes on how the data is collected and who it's collected on. Looking at the benefits, one of the potential benefits is that would-be criminals and terrorists perceive a greater risk of being caught if they know that they are being watched, which could serve as a detriment. Secondly, law-abiding citizens perceive an enhanced sense of safety where surveillance systems exist. It's very effective in tracking criminal activity, and surveillance systems have been shown to aid investigations, providing crucial evidence needed in the search and prosecution of wanted suspects. A good example of this was the use of the closed-circuit television cameras around Boston that were used to identify and locate the Boston Marathon bombers in the terrorist attack in 2013. There are a number of consequences from unchecked mandated surveillance. The first one is that some of these measures, such as unwarranted phone and internet surveillance, are violations of our constitutional rights. More so, it infringes very heavily on our expectation of privacy, especially in our homes. It reduces trust in government agencies, as there's a great lack of transparency in how these surveillance programs are constructed and what they're actually surveilling. And lastly, backdoor software defeats the purpose of encrypting data and can actually result in major security vulnerabilities in terms of cyber attacks and hacking. The current status of mandated surveillance is that mass data collection still continues. In 2015, Congress passed the USA Freedom Act that called on the NSA to stop collecting phone records of millions of Americans. However, many other forms of mandated electronic surveillance continues. Tech companies are still seeking reform on how the data is gathered. The current level of mass surveillance has resulted in an excessive amount of data, so much data that it's actually been hard for agencies to identify who is a serious and immediate threat and who is not. It's very inefficient at identifying true threats. Lastly, surveillance has proven minimally effective. Studies have shown that the increased collection of data has had little and no effect at preventing terrorism, such as the recent attacks in Paris and Manchester. Some topics for discussion. First, is mandated IT surveillance ethical? Secondly, when and for what purpose should the government collect personal electronic data? And third, do you believe companies like Apple will continue to resist efforts by government agencies to create backdoors and gather mass web data? Here are my references. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to our discussion.